Growing up, I always knew I wanted to be an artist. I can't pinpoint exactly when it started, but my earliest memories are filled with sketchbooks, crayons, and little doodles on every scrap of paper I could find. By the time I was 10, my teachers were constantly telling my parents I had talent. One even went so far as to say I could make a career out of it. At the time, I didn't realize how that would turn into such a huge point of contention later in life. My parents, however, had other ideas. For context, they're immigrants who worked incredibly hard to give me and my siblings a comfortable life. Their version of success was very traditional, stable job, steady income, and preferably something that makes you sound impressive at family gatherings. Being an artist? That wasn't part of the equation. They'd nod politely whenever someone complimented my art, but they'd always follow it up with, "It's just a hobby." When I turned 16, things started to get more intense. I won a regional art competition, and part of the prize was a scholarship to attend an exclusive summer program at a renowned art school. It was a huge deal, but when I showed my parents the acceptance letter, they barely looked at it. Instead, they told me there was no point in going because real life doesn't work that way. I didn't go. That should have been my first warning sign. Fast forward to senior year of high school. I worked my butt off and applied to as many art schools as I could. Somehow, I landed a full scholarship to my dream school, which was halfway across the country. I was ecstatic. I couldn't wait to pack my bags and finally start living the life I wanted. But when I told my parents, they shot it down immediately. "You're not moving that far away," they said. "What about your family? What will people say if you leave us like that? Besides, you need to pick something practical." They didn't just stop at words. They flat out refused to sign the paperwork I needed to finalize my enrollment. I begged, I cried, but they were adamant. They told me I could either stay local and pursue a business degree or figure out how to survive completely on my own, which at 18 wasn't exactly realistic. My dream school's offer expired, and I ended up enrolling in a local university for a degree I had zero interest in. That's when the resentment really started to build. I felt trapped, like my life wasn't mine anymore. But it wasn't like I could just rebel. My parents still controlled a lot of my finances, and I had to work part-time to help cover what they wouldn't. I spent every day juggling a degree I hated, a job I tolerated, and a family that constantly reminded me how much they had sacrificed for me. The guilt trips were constant. "We gave up so much so you could have a better life. You can't throw it all away for a silly dream." Meanwhile, my art took a backseat. It was hard to find time for it between work, school, and trying to maintain peace at home. But every now and then, I'd see someone online doing what I had dreamed of, and it would sting all over again. My parents, on the other hand, would casually talk about how they wish they'd pursued their own passions. My mom always wanted to travel, and my dad had dreamed of starting his own business. Hearing them talk like that was infuriating. They wanted me to give up my dream while they were sitting there regretting their own choices. The breakthrough came during my junior year. A close friend of mine, who knew how much I missed creating art, introduced me to a few online communities where people shared and sold their work anonymously. She even helped me set up my first profile. At first, it was just a way to dip my toes back into something I loved, but it quickly turned into so much more. My first piece sold for $50. It wasn't much, but it lit a fire under me. I started taking on small commissions whenever I could find the time, usually late at night when my parents thought I was studying. By the time I graduated, my side hustle was bringing in decent money, enough to cover some bills and start a small savings account. My parents had no idea. They were too busy celebrating the fact that I'd landed a corporate job right out of school, which they saw as the ultimate success. I hated it, but I kept my head down and played along. Then came the moment that changed everything. During one of those family conversations where my parents were reminiscing about their younger years, my mom said, if I could go back, I'd do things so differently. I wouldn't let fear stop me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. They'd lived their lives afraid of what other people would think, and now they were projecting that fear onto me. But I wasn't going to let it ruin my future. That night, I made a decision. I was going to reclaim the dream they stole from me, no matter what it took. I just had to play my cards right. After graduation, my corporate job became the perfect cover. By day, I showed up in business casual, sat through endless meetings, and did just enough to avoid being noticed. By night, I worked on my art. At first, it was just small commissions from people who found me through online platforms, but over time, I started posting more on social media. One of my posts, a digital painting I'd done for fun, got shared by a popular account, and overnight my inbox exploded. Suddenly, my side hustle wasn't so side anymore. I opened a separate bank account, one my parents didn't know about, and started saving aggressively. Every spare dollar went into that account. I even downgraded my lifestyle, no fancy coffees, no unnecessary shopping, just so I could funnel as much as possible into my fund. Within a year, I had enough saved to feel a little secure. That's when things took a turn. Out of nowhere, my parents started hinting at money problems. First, it was vague comments about how things are tight. Then, I overheard them arguing about missed payments. It didn't take long for the full story to come out. They had made some bad investment decisions, and now they were struggling to keep up with their mortgage. I didn't bring it up, waiting to see if they'd ask me directly. They did. When my parents sat me down to talk, they framed it as a family issue. They emphasized how much they'd done for me and my siblings, how they'd sacrificed so much to give us a good life. Now, they needed my help. They wanted me to contribute to paying off their mortgage, calling it my duty as their eldest. It was like they expected me to just hand over my savings without question. I agreed on one condition. If I was going to help, I needed to manage their finances. I told them I didn't want to throw money at the problem only for it to happen again. They reluctantly agreed, and I got access to their accounts. What I saw was worse than I'd imagined. Overdue bills, credit card debt, and more risky investments they were trying to recover from. It was a mess, but it also gave me leverage. With their accounts under my control, I set strict limits on their spending. I created a budget and stuck to it, funneling any extra income into paying down the mortgage. At the same time, I kept growing my side hustle. my art was gaining traction online, and I started taking bigger risks, commissioning ads, partnering with influencers, and selling prints. It worked. My income doubled in 6 months, and my secret fund grew even faster. With money coming in steadily, I started treating my parents to small luxuries. I'd take them out for dinner or book a weekend getaway, always framing it as my way of giving back. They were thrilled and never questioned where the money was coming from. Meanwhile, I was subtly shifting the dynamic. I'd drop comments like, "Isn't it nice to enjoy life a little? You should have done this sooner." They didn't realize I was mirroring the guilt trips they'd used on me for years. Eventually, I hit a major milestone. I paid off a significant portion of their mortgage. My parents were over the moon. They told everyone how proud they were of my hard work at my corporate job, completely oblivious to the fact that my art was funding everything. I didn't correct them. Letting them believe what they wanted was part of the plan. Then, something incredible happened. One of my pieces went viral again. But this time it wasn't just online. It caught the attention of a well-known art blog, and sales skyrocketed. I used the windfall to invest in a small studio space. It wasn't much, just a rented room in a shared workspace, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building towards something real. While all this was happening, I slowly started pulling back from my corporate job. I didn't quit outright, knowing that would raise questions, but I negotiated for reduced hours. To my parents, it looked like I was working hard as ever, climbing the ladder in a respectable career. In reality, I was pouring most of my energy into my art. I also kept meticulous records of every dollar I spent on my parents. Spreadsheets, receipts, even screenshots of bank transfers. I documented everything. It wasn't about holding it over their heads, at least not yet. It was about protecting myself for when the truth inevitably came out. Despite all the progress I was making, the resentment never fully went away. My parents continued to make little comments about how grateful I should be for their guidance, how they'd saved me from wasting my life on a hobby. I smiled and nodded, but inside, I was counting down the days until I could reveal just how wrong they were. For now, I played the part of the dutiful daughter, but every dinner I paid for, every bill I covered, was one step closer to reclaiming the life they'd taken from me. Family dinners at my parents' house had always been predictable: food, small talk, and the occasional veiled criticism disguised as advice. But this particular evening, the conversation took an unexpected turn. My mom brought up a distant cousin who dropped out of college to pursue art. She shook her head, calling it a waste of potential, and went on about how that cousin would regret it when they couldn't pay their bills. My dad chimed in, agreeing that creative careers were nothing more than hobbies. For the first time, I pushed back. I said something about how following your passion isn't always a bad thing and how some people make it work. My parents immediately got defensive, acting like I'd suggested something outrageous. They went on about how real life doesn't allow for such risks and how practical choices are always better. What they didn't realize was that their words were cutting a little too close to home. When they tried to change the subject, I dropped my first warning shot. Casually, I mentioned how much I'd contributed to their mortgage and how I'd been the one keeping things afloat. My dad looked stunned for a moment before recovering, brushing it off like it wasn't a big deal. A few weeks later, things got worse for them. My parents had a small side business they'd been running for years, something they liked to boast about at family gatherings. But their business wasn't doing well. It had been bleeding money for months, and they were barely keeping it alive. Eventually, it collapsed completely. They were devastated, and their dependence on me grew even more. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I told them that since I was the one covering most of the bills now, all major financial decisions needed my approval. They didn't like it, but they didn't argue either. It was a power shift they couldn't deny, even if they pretended not to notice. While I was keeping their finances in check, I was also working on something big. My art studio, the one I'd quietly invested in, was finally ready. I launched it under a pseudonym to keep things under wraps. Within weeks, it started gaining traction. Orders rolled in, and I was making more money than ever. I thought I'd covered my tracks well, but then a neighbor recognized one of my pieces. They had seen it online and connected the dots, bringing it up casually during a visit to my parents' house. My mom called me later, asking if it was true. I didn't deny it, but didn't give them the full story either. That wasn't enough for them. They showed up at my apartment the next day, demanding to know why I had kept this part of my life a secret. It was the confrontation I had been dreading, but I stayed calm. I told them that they had made it impossible for me to pursue art openly, so I had to do it on my own. I explained how my corporate job had been a cover and how my art had funded everything they thought was coming from my practical career. They didn't take it well. My dad accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, while my mom tried to guilt me into focusing on the family instead of my hobby. That's when I hit them with the revelation. The money they were so reliant on had come from the very dream they had tried to crush. I didn't spell it out, but I made it clear enough for them to understand. For the next few weeks, they gave me the silent treatment. They acted offended, like I had betrayed them, even though I was still covering their bills. During this time, something amazing happened. A local gallery reached out, asking to feature my work in an upcoming show. It was the kind of opportunity I had only dreamed of, and I immediately said yes. The gallery event was a huge success. People showed up in droves, and my pieces sold out within hours. It was surreal, seeing years of hard work finally paying off. The best part? The gallery's publicity brought even more attention to my studio, and commissions skyrocketed. My parents found out about the gallery from another family member. They didn't congratulate me or ask about the event. Instead, they acted like nothing had happened. But I knew they were paying attention. Their silence wasn't just about being offended, it was about realizing how much control they'd lost. Things are different now. My art is thriving, my finances are secure, and for the first time I feel like I'm in control of my life. My parents, on the other hand, are struggling to adjust to the new dynamic. They've started to realize how much they depend on me, and it's clear they don't know how to handle it. I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but one thing is certain, I'm not going back to the way things were. The gallery success was bigger than I could have imagined. Not only did every piece in my exhibit sell out, but I also received offers for future collaborations with some prominent artists and curators. It felt like my career was finally taking off. My name, well, my pseudonym, was being talked about in local art circles, and I was starting to feel the shift from struggling artist to someone who could actually make a living doing what they loved. Word of the exhibit traveled fast among my extended family. A few relatives pressured my parents into attending my next event. They hadn't shown any interest in my art before, but they reluctantly showed up to save face. Watching them walk into the gallery, clearly uncomfortable but trying to act supportive, was a surreal moment. My mom plastered on a smile and my dad shook a few hands, but it was obvious they were out of their element. The gallery was packed. Strangers came up to me to share how much they loved my work, some even calling me an inspiration. My parents couldn't escape the praise either. A couple of guests, unaware of our history, complimented them on raising such a talented daughter. I saw the embarrassment flash across their faces, but they nodded along, pretending they had always been supportive. After the event, my parents made their move. They started telling anyone who would listen that they'd always encourage my creativity. It was such an obvious attempt to rewrite history that I couldn't help but laugh. I overheard my mom telling an aunt how she always knew I'd make it because I had such a creative spark. My dad nodded, adding that they'd done everything they could to nurture my talent. The audacity of it all was almost impressive. I decided I wasn't going to let them get away with it. When they came over to my apartment a few days later, I brought up the event. I didn't waste time sugarcoating it. I told them it was hypocritical to act like they'd been supportive when they'd done everything in their power to shut down my dreams. My mom tried to deflect, saying they only wanted what was best for me. My dad doubled down, claiming they were never unsupportive, just realistic. That's when I laid out the receipts, literally. I pulled out the spreadsheets I'd been keeping of every dollar I'd spent to cover their debts, from mortgage payments to utility bills. I explained how my art, not my corporate job, had funded everything. I even showed them the revenue reports from my online sales and the receipts for their expenses. The room went silent. Instead of acknowledging what I'd done, they got defensive. My dad accused me of trying to humiliate them, while my mom insisted I was exaggerating their mistakes. It was a classic move, deflect and deny. But this time, I didn't let it slide. I told them I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. I was just setting the record straight. The confrontation didn't end there. Word of our argument spread to the rest of the family, thanks to my mom venting to a few relatives. But to my surprise, most of the extended family sided with me. Some even called out my parents for their treatment of me over the years. It created a noticeable rift, with my parents on one side and me, along with a growing number of relatives, on the other. I stopped engaging with their attempts to spin the narrative. When they called or texted, I kept things polite but distant. I had no interest in debating the past anymore. Instead, I focused on what was ahead. With my art career taking off, I finally had the financial stability to leave my corporate job for good. I handed in my resignation and walked out of the office for the last time, feeling lighter than I had in years. Quitting my job sent a clear message to my parents. I was done pretending to live the life they wanted for me. They panicked. Within a week, they were calling me daily, asking for help with their finances. My dad admitted they were struggling to manage things without my contributions, and my mom promised they would do better if I continued to support them. I agreed to help, but on my terms. I told them any financial support going forward would come with written agreements. No more guilt trips, no more emotional manipulation. If they wanted my help, it would be strictly business. They reluctantly agreed, though I could tell they weren't happy about it. Over time, they started sharing more about their own regrets. My mom admitted she'd always wanted to travel, but fear of judgment held her back. My dad confessed he had once dreamed of starting his own business but had been too afraid of failure. They stopped short of apologizing for what they'd done to me, but their regret was obvious. Now, I finally feel free. My art studio is thriving, and I'm working on my first international collaboration. For the first time, I don't feel like I need their approval, or anyone else's, for that matter. My parents and I are on speaking terms, but the dynamic has shifted. I'm no longer the child they can control, and they know it. Looking back, it's clear they tried to live through me, forcing their fears and regrets onto my life. But I've reclaimed what they tried to take away, and I'm not letting go. The email came one morning as I was sipping my coffee in my studio. An internationally renowned art residency was offering me a spot in their upcoming program. It was a dream opportunity, 6 months in Europe, collaborating with other artists, and a chance to showcase my work on a global stage. I had worked hard for this, and I wasn't going to pass it up. When I told my parents about the residency, I expected them to be proud. Instead, their response was anything but supportive. My mom immediately turned the conversation to how she had always wanted to travel but never got the chance. My dad made a comment about how lucky I was, but it didn't sound like praise, it sounded bitter. It wasn't the reaction I had hoped for, but I brushed it off. I thought they'd come around once they saw how big this opportunity was. A week later, my parents called me over for what they called a family discussion. They started by bringing up their finances, which they were struggling with again. Then, they asked me to delay the residency, suggesting I should stay to help them get back on track. My dad framed it as putting family first, and my mom said it was my responsibility as their child. This wasn't the first time they had tried to guilt me into prioritizing their needs over my own, but this time I wasn't having it. I told them I had already done enough, I had sacrificed my dreams once for them, and I wasn't about to do it again. I reminded them that I had already set up a system to help manage their finances, and that it wasn't my job to solve their problems anymore. They didn't take it well. My dad raised the stakes, saying that if I went through with the residency and abandoned the family, they would cut ties with me. My mom, always the emotional one, started talking about how ungrateful I was for everything they had done for me. They clearly expected me to back down, but I didn't. I calmly told them that if cutting ties was what they wanted, I would respect their decision. Then I walked out. Word of our conflict spread quickly through the family. Some relatives supported me, saying I had every right to focus on my career after everything I had done for my parents. Others, predictably, sided with my parents, accusing me of being selfish and abandoning my responsibilities. The mixed reactions didn't bother me. I had made up my mind, and I wasn't going to let anyone guilt me into changing it. The residency turned out to be everything I had hoped for and more. The creative environment pushed me to new heights, and my work flourished. My pieces were featured in international galleries, and one even caught the attention of a major publishing house. By the end of the program, I had signed a lucrative deal to publish a collection of my art, which would secure my financial future for years to come. While I was thriving abroad, my parents were struggling back home. Without my financial support, they quickly realized how much they had relied on me. I heard through the grapevine that they had to downsize and move into a smaller house. It wasn't something I took pleasure in, but it was a reality they had to face. During the residency, I worked on a special piece. It was deeply personal, inspired by the dreams I had once been forced to give up. When it was unveiled at a gallery in Paris, it quickly became one of my most talked about works. I titled it The Stolen Dreams of a Younger Self, and it resonated with people in ways I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about my story, it was about anyone who had ever felt stifled by others' expectations. When my parents saw the artwork online, they reached out. They sent me a letter acknowledging that they had made mistakes in how they treated my passion. They admitted they regretted pushing me into a career I didn't want and expressed how proud they were of what I had accomplished. However, their letter stopped short of a full apology, and there was still an undertone of defensiveness about their actions. I wrote back thanking them for acknowledging their mistakes but making it clear that I had moved on. I told them I was no longer interested in revisiting the past or allowing it to dictate my future. I also informed them that I would no longer be providing financial support beyond the essentials we had agreed upon in the contract. They didn't respond, and that was fine with me. Cutting the financial strings was the final step in reclaiming my independence. For the first time, I felt truly free. I no longer needed their approval, and I no longer felt the weight of their expectations hanging over me. My career was thriving, my finances were secure, and I had finally found peace with the decisions I had made. Looking back, I can see how much I've grown. The girl who once felt trapped by her parents' control is gone. In her place is a woman who has taken back her life, one brushstroke at a time. A few months after returning from the residency, everything in my career reached new heights. One of my latest pieces, a large-scale painting inspired by my journey, sold for a record-breaking amount at an auction. It was surreal to think about how far I'd come. The piece was featured in major art publications, and I began receiving invitations to collaborate with internationally renowned galleries. It wasn't just a career anymore, it was a legacy in the making. Not long after, a filmmaker reached out with a proposal for a documentary. They wanted to tell my story, how I'd grown up in a household that stifled my creativity, how I had secretly pursued my passion, and how I had built my career despite the odds. I agreed, but on one condition: the focus had to be on the resilience of artists who face these challenges, not just me. The documentary gained traction quickly, sparking conversations online about the importance of following your passions, even when others don't support you. When the documentary premiered, it received critical acclaim. Viewers were moved by the stories of struggle and triumph, and my story was at the heart of it. My parents, however, were not thrilled. The film didn't paint them as villains, but it didn't shy away from their actions either. Watching their decisions laid bare for the world to see left them humiliated. I wasn't surprised when they tried to spin the narrative again. They started publicly praising my success, claiming they'd always known I would achieve great things. In interviews and family gatherings, they conveniently left out how they had tried to derail my dreams at every turn. It was frustrating, but I chose not to engage. Their attempts to align themselves with my success only made their previous actions more obvious to those who knew the truth. The documentary also stirred up fresh tension within my extended family. Some relatives accused me of airing dirty laundry and embarrassing the family, while others openly supported me, saying it was brave to tell the truth. I kept my distance from the drama, focusing instead on the next step in my journey. With my newfound success, I decided to give back. I started a foundation to support young artists from underprivileged backgrounds, offering grants and mentorship programs to help them pursue their passions without the obstacles I had faced. Launching the foundation was one of the most rewarding things I had ever done, knowing I was helping others avoid the pain and frustration I had experienced. Meanwhile, my parents' financial situation continued to deteriorate. Without my regular contributions, they struggled to keep up with their expenses. Eventually, they faced foreclosure and had to downsize significantly. I wasn't happy to see them suffer, but I also knew it wasn't my responsibility to fix their mistakes. Still, when they reached out for help again, I offered one final olive branch. I agreed to help them stabilize their finances, but only under strict conditions. Everything had to be documented, with no room for manipulation or guilt tripping. This time, they didn't argue. They were too desperate to push back. It was a transactional arrangement, far from the emotional grip they once had over me. Then, something unexpected happened. My parents wrote me a letter, this time a real apology. They admitted to the mistakes they had made and the harm they had caused by not supporting my dreams. For the first time, there was no defensiveness or excuses, just a sincere acknowledgement of their actions. It was the apology I had stopped hoping for, and while it didn't erase the past, it brought a sense of closure. I forgave them, but I kept my boundaries firm. We maintained limited interaction, enough for civility but far from the control they once held over my life. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was enough for me to move forward without resentment. With my parents' chapter finally resolved, I turned my attention to my biggest dream, owning my own art studio and gallery space. After years of saving and planning, I purchased a beautiful property, a sprawling space with room for creating, exhibiting, and hosting workshops. It was everything I had envisioned when I was a teenager sketching in my room, wondering if I'd ever get the chance to live my dream. Standing in the studio for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. This was mine. I had built it, brushstroke by brushstroke. The first exhibit I hosted in the gallery was a retrospective of my work, tracing my journey from hidden sketches to international acclaim. The centerpiece of the show was the stolen dreams of a younger self, the piece that had resonated with so many people and changed the course of my career. It was a powerful reminder of how far I had come and how much I had reclaimed. Today, my name is associated with resilience and the power of pursuing your dreams, no matter the cost. The foundation is thriving, my art is inspiring others, and my life is my own. Looking back, the struggles I faced with my parents were painful, but they also shaped me into who I am today. They taught me the value of fighting for what you love, even when the odds are stacked against you. My story isn't just about reclaiming a dream. It's about creating a legacy that helps others do the same. And for that, I'm endlessly grateful.